Good morning.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Morning View Mackinac Uncensored. This is a great new program lineup to make it a little bit easier and a little more comfortable for your Friday morning. And welcome to all of you out there watching in.
Grab a cup of coffee, a croissant, a Bloody Mary if you need one, and sit back and relax. We got a great lineup of 15 to 20-minute segments on some very, very hot topics this morning.
So we're going to kick it off this morning with a really important discussion, and that's the governor's race that'll be coming up before we know it. And we have the best experts who can always give you the inside scoop. We have Kelly Rossman McKinney and John Truscott, and we can't wait to hear from them. So let's kick it over to Rick Pluta.
Rick?
Good morning. So we're inaugurating this, no pressure. But before we start, I want to do a temperature check of the room here on the island. How many people here are running or thinking about running for governor? There seem to be a few of you.
Well, I have an announcement to make.
There goes the firm.
Join the line. So, my question actually is looking ahead, not to the primary 15 months from now, although it seems like we're getting a pretty good idea, not of who's going to get in, but when they're going to get in.
We do?
But my...
We do? I thought Brian Calley was going to announce this week. We don't have a sense of when they're going to announce.
No, that's the question.
That's
the question.
I jumped the ball there.
But looking ahead actually to November, it seems like in the last several cycles, what we've seen is that instead of all politics being local, all politics has become federal, that they're really referendums on what's going on in Washington. Can state issues in this environment decide a race for who's going to run the state? And let's start with you, JT.
I think they can. I think what we're dealing with is people are trying out different issues at this point, and they haven't really settled on what the big issue is going to be or what the top three will be. So what you do early in a race is get out and kind of survey people, what matters to them, and then at some point, a campaign gets taken over by external issues and things that kind of get thrown up, things that we can't predict will happen at this point. I mean, when you look at the presidential election and the chaos that went through, and I know we've done some stuff for the Detroit Regional Chamber before where I never would have predicted a President Trump.
Well, but so if you look at Gretchen Whitmer's communications, you would think she's running against President Trump.
And if I were heard this early, I'd do the same. That's what people understand and know in the moment. But things will happen as people start to focus down more on a statewide race.
And keep in mind, timing-wise now, you're talking about a primary that the candidates are running in. So you have to prove in a Democratic or a Republican primary that you are most reflective of the party's goals and ideals. So that's exactly why I'm sure Gretchen is positioning herself as so anti-Trump. Not that that's hard to do, but that's exactly what she's supposed to do right now.
And why Brian Calley has adopted as his mantra, part-time legislature.
Well, so I do not understand, nor do I believe my partner does, I do not understand how Brian set the stage, allowing people and encouraging people to think that he would announce his campaign for governor this week. He said he had two major announcements. So Tuesday, first of all, most people are expecting that's the gubernatorial candidacy announcement, and then it's part-time legislature. And then he said, well, there's another announcement on Thursday. I don't even know what he announced. All I know is it wasn't governor. So he's now, I think, really overplayed his hand. He has the potential to be a great candidate, but this whole sort of teasing out and then doing part-time legislature as you're running for governor, that seems to me that you just want to make sure you have even more power than a governor currently does.
It'll be interesting to see how these things play out as these campaigns run in tandem. So what do the other candidates do? Because you might remember that Bill Schuette, again, not formally into the race for the Republican nomination, but everyone's expecting it, the week before published an op-ed in the Detroit News that seemed to be almost a, what the Calley government reform effort seemed to be almost a reflection of that.
You know, I do think government reform always has a populist appeal, very much so. What is on the table right now would make Michigan, if you're looking to be governor and get things done, it would make Michigan almost ungovernable. I mean, imagine right now they don't have relationships that really develop over time, so you get
You're
to know
talking about the effect of term limits.
term limits, but you're going to add in, they're only going to know each other or work together 90 days out of the year. And so you think of the effects that that'll have on the system. Although in a campaign, you're running for a certain segment. And, you know, I was going to say this is the only time you'll find me to the left of Kelly. But when you look at those dynamics and you're going after a niche audience in a primary, so they're going to keep moving to the right in the Republican Party to try to outdo each other. And I think that creates a problem in terms of good governance.
I think that government reform issue really works for an outsider candidate. But when you're the lieutenant governor and the attorney
Running
general,
against the establishment.
you're running against yourself. You've been part of the establishment.
Well, let me ask you this, that what are, and a question in two parts, what are the qualities that a candidate will need to win the election, and then the qualities that the winner will need to actually govern? And both of you have served, you know, in administrations. So, you know, you have some idea what it takes.
I think we're in such uncharted territory politically, given what happened with the presidential election. I mean, nobody would have predicted President Trump and the personality and just everything that went into it. And
By the way, I'm still
he could
predicting
survive.
that Hillary Clinton will win the Democratic primary in Michigan.
Good luck with that.
You know, I really think, you know, the governor has established a very good record, Governor Snyder has. So following on that, is there, in the voting public, is there going to be fatigue from Governor Snyder, which gives Brian Calley some really interesting dynamics to try to get around? Does Bill Schuette run against Governor Snyder at that point? There are early indications he's picking a few issues to do that. In the end, I really think...
Picking a few issues?
I'm trying to be
Every
polite. Everybody's tired, you know, getting ready to take off. I think a lot of it is what's going to happen at the federal level. Is there chaos there? Are they agreeing getting things done? What's that dynamic? And is there backlash locally in Michigan that we want somebody who can get the job done? And I think we're still too far off to determine that.
But you know, the other part of the question you asked is what qualities do you need to actually govern? And I think both John and I agree that you really have to have legislative experience. You have to understand how the legislature works, and you have to have a deep respect for the legislative role. And both Governor Snyder and Governor Granholm had no legislative experience. And there are candidates, I mean, both Brian Calley, Bill Schuette, and Gretchen Whitmer, they've all served in the legislature. That experience, in my opinion, and I think John agrees, makes you much better suited to govern. And John Engler was a perfect example of that. I mean, I didn't like many of John Engler's policies, but I view him as one of the most effective governors we've had.
Actually, just in talking to the candidates, one of the interesting things is both on the Republican and the Democratic side that a lot of them are saying that in terms of the mechanics of the job, you know, how you would go about it, that they've sort of adopted John Engler as the model for doing it, and neither of the last two governors. What does that say to you?
You know, but, you know...
They're right.
if they're adopting it, they're certainly not acting like that's what would be implemented. John Engler today in this legislature would be a liberal. I mean, it's just given how far things have moved, but he was also very pragmatic and got things done. We don't have that type of cooperation and deal-making going on saying, you know, we're going to have different positions, but in the end, we have to get things done. This is the drop-dead time, and we're going to do it. So, you know, I know we still have some new leaders, things that, you know, the process is developing, but they've got a long way to go to kind of model themselves after what Governor Engler did.
Well, and it would be, I'd be very surprised if a Democrat wasn't elected governor for the following reason. We have a history in our state of, at the end of a governor's term, when they've been termed out, we flipped to the other party. It went from Milliken to Blanchard to Engler to Granholm to Snyder. It's the Democrats' turn.
And we have a Republican in the White House, and we know that plays
exactly.
a part in...
The midterm election also tends to go opposite of where the federal election went. So you'd a Democratic candidate, whether it's Gretchen Whitmer or whether Mark Bernstein jumps into the race, or God forbid, Jeffrey Feiger raises his blonde head. it's likely to be a Democrat who serves.
It's possible. Does the...
Did you just dismiss me with it's possible? It's probable, my dear, it's probable.
We know what history shows us.
Yes,
That you're
right?
correct
Go
in that
ahead, you
regard.
can say that. I was right, I'm right.
But, you know,
See what I have to deal with?
but the last election also showed us that, you know,
You can't predict a darn
beware
thing.
of
Yeah.
predictions.
Yeah.
Will whoever is the next governor, do they need to go out and, while they're campaigning for governor, also campaign to get a legislature that's on board with them?
No.
No?
No, when you're campaigning for governor, you're campaigning for yourself.
Yeah.
You will go out and campaign with your candidates at the local level, but you're not going to hitch your wagon to them and how their campaigns may be successful or not. You run yourself and you hope that your coattails bring them up.
Well, and let the Senate and the House campaign committees do their work. That's what they're supposed to do.
But that speaks to the relationships that you were talking about.
Well, definitely, you want to have those relationships, but and you are likely, a statewide candidate is likely to campaign in a local community with that party's candidates. But to take an extra effort to help those candidates get elected, no, you got your own deal. You got to work for your own candidacy.
So you said that the next governor ought to have legislative experience. Is there room, because there are some people talking about this, is there room for an outsider?
No.
I think there's
God
always
forbid.
room. You know, whether it happens or not is another question.
But let's keep in mind, let's be practical. There's this theory that government should run as a business, and government is not a business. There are certain skills and experiences that business leaders can bring to the table, but if you do not understand how the legislature works, if you do not understand, embrace, and live the Michigan Constitution, you will not govern that well.
Is that how you win an election?
No. No, because people don't vote on your ability to govern. They vote on personality and do I think this person is really going to represent me?
Will we see a singular issue that captures the public's imagination that will define the 2018 race?
I don't think we know yet. When you get an issue like that, it's typically externally driven. It's not something that a candidate can really set up. It doesn't quite work that way. They don't have the financing. They may not want to put their personality behind it, but it will be externally driven. Is there a Flint water crisis? Is there, the Detroit Public Schools issue that we went through? Are there things like that that we're not aware of yet? And that's one thing about a candidate. You have to be nimble and be ready to adapt when those issues come up.
So if the election were held, had been held even earlier this year or last year, Flint water would be the overarching issue. But what I've seen across the state is that there's Flint fatigue almost everywhere around the state, except in some circles. And people are just like, okay, get over it. Let's, move forward. Ditto with Detroit. Detroit's on the mend. Okay, we've taken care of Detroit. So you're not seeing that one problem emerge, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you're seeing in the governor's news conference with business leaders for Michigan yesterday, with Good Jobs for Michigan, you're seeing a real concerted effort to move forward and bring more jobs to Michigan. So you're less problem solving and being more proactive in terms of bringing more jobs to Michigan.
But the thing about that, the effects of what they are trying to do with that incentive are not going to play out between now and the next election. They're going to play out over a decade or more.
Right.
A decision will play out within the next 2 months.
A decision will.
And
Right.
this will be, and the prep for that and the realization of what these jobs could mean for Michigan, the image of Michigan, and the type of manufacturing that turns to more IT. I think this is more significant than anybody realizes at this point.
That plays out here on this island, but does it play out among the rest of the 6 million
If a
people who are
company
voting?
comes into Southeast Michigan and says, we're hiring 7,000 people and we're going to start doing job fairs and we're going to start doing the job training, that will have a significant impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the one thing that you don't have that sometimes you have have as candidates who are actually serving in the legislature. So you're not going to be able to go back and see whether somebody voted for or against more jobs for Michigan. So that's the one thing you don't have in this particular race that sometimes you do. But Gretchen Whitmer is a really good example. Brian Kelly is another example of where their votes in the past are likely to be used for or against them.
And that gets to where maybe there's room for an outsider who doesn't have a record like that.
God forbid we have an outsider. Seriously, haven't we had enough outsiders?
The voters will
Rick?
let us know.
I want somebody who knows how to govern and who knows and understands what the role of the legislature is. I want somebody who doesn't walk in and say, I'm going to run state government like a business, because state government is not a business. There are certain skills and experiences you can bring to the table, but by God, you better know how to govern.
All I have to
Quickly.
say is, with our potential candidate for the state senate here, if we have a governor who doesn't have that experience, I know somebody that will help get that governor that some experience.
That's the final word. John Trescott, Kelly Rossman, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Fun.
You
Thanks.
bet. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Well, that was interesting. Do you have any announcements to make?
No announcements, but I see Stephen Polk over there, and now that his responsibilities are done here on the island, I think he might throw his hat in the race.
We have our next panel coming up and talking about Michigan legislative term limits.
It's going to be a very good conversation. We have some people up here that have no shortage of opinions.
Yeah, so Chad, we'll turn it over to you.
Well, welcome. Term limits. Everyone raise your hand if you love them. Well, there's one hand. Okay. Well, you work for the Mackinac Center, don't you, sir? Okay, well.
How long have
welcome.
you worked there? Oh, well, you got about 5 left?
We got Joe Lehman and Randy Richardville here. I'm Chad Livengood from Cranes and Trade Business. First, start off, Joe, you like term limits. Explain why.
Yeah, I voted for term limits and support them, but I think that they have not lived up to the highest hopes of people who supported them. But on the whole, I'm still positive on them, but I understand that they haven't lived up to the highest hopes.
Randy, did you vote for term limits as a voter?
I don't remember. I was just a kid.
Okay, yeah, right.
I don't remember. I really don't remember if I voted for them or not. Most likely, I did. And I think that in a perfect world, term limits are silly. You're supposed to have a group of an electorate that knows what they're doing and can pick somebody. Term limits are the ballot box. But it's not a perfect world, and I think that term limits can be utilized all right. It's just that in Michigan, we have the most limiting in the United States, and I don't think that's an optimum way for us to run our government.
Randy, how did you, what kind of obstacles did you run into when you saw term limits, besides the ones that forced you out of office?
Well, I'm a little bit in the middle here, because I probably would never have run for office if there wasn't such a thing as term limits. We had a long-term representative down in Monroe County named Lynn Owen, who had to leave office in 1998. So in 1996, I ran against him and was recruited specifically because it was a seat that the Republicans thought that they could win with the right candidate. They were wrong that first term, but then that set us up to run for the next one, and I was successful there. There was a lot to learn, but I still had a lot of institutional knowledge when I went up there. The Senate had not had term limits, hadn't hit there yet, so there were a lot of long-term senators, people like Harry Gass that had been around for a long time. You could learn from, you could watch as an example of what a statesman should be. But after about the 3rd or 4th iteration, pretty much everybody that had been there for a long time is gone. You don't have that institutional memory anymore. The Speaker of the House takes over one of the most important positions with 2 or at a max 4 years experience. Then you've only got him there for 2 years. Excuse me. So I don't think people would run their corporations that way. I don't think they would run their nonprofits that way. So 6 years I just think is way too limiting, and we should look at possibly altering. You can still keep term limits in place for the purists that say, you're going to be corrupt someday, so you might as well just put a limit on how much corruption we're going to foster. But put it at something like 14. If you want to keep it at 14 years, allow it to be in one chamber or the other, so that the speaker has some more leadership experience. And I was elected the majority floor leader in my 3rd term, at the beginning of my 3rd term. And if you ask me, could I do that job better if I had more experience? Hell yeah, I could. but I didn't have that opportunity. So I'm speaking from my own experience, not just from a theoretical platform. If I had been there 6 or 8 years before I could run for that leadership position, I'd have known a lot better how to do it, and it wouldn't have been such a steep learning curve for me.
Joe, what corporation in America would put a junior associate in the CEO's office like we do in the legislature every 2 to 4 years with a speaker?
I don't know any corporation in America that isn't constantly looking for the best talent that it can find and trying to get that talent in as fast as they can move other people and release them to industry. I think it's a fallacious argument that experience in government is the only thing that we need in government, because the cost of a year's experience in government, the trade-off there, is a year's experience outside of government. People aren't sitting in a dark room waiting to run for office. They're out there. They're either being in business, they're farmers, they're teachers. Who do you want on the education committee? A teacher might be nice. Who do you want on the natural resources committee? Maybe a forester would be nice. Maybe not as good as somebody who's been in the legislature for 10, 20, 30 years.
I don't know a single teacher in the legislature right now.
Is that right?
Does anybody? No,
Yeah, there are a couple. I think some of the new freshman representatives are teachers.
Okay,
At least
but
3 of them, I think.
How much
And the
experience
Republicans,
do,
too,
How
which
much
is weird.
life experience do people who are 24 years old have? And I'm saying this from the pretentious level of age 34.
Yeah.
There are people a decade younger than me that are in the legislature now. How much are they really bringing as far as a value of
So
talent?
I think you're saying let's amend the state constitution to raise the age requirement. That constitution has been there since maybe 1861.
That's okay. I mean, I don't think the longevity of it has something to do with the relevance of that change today. But, you know, the legislature, when I started, the average age of a legislator in Michigan was 45. Today, it's still 45. The difference is the standard deviation from 45. It used to be 35 to 55. Now it's like 20 to 70 or 80 or something similar to that. The legislature has turned into the Love Boat. You only get invited if you're at the beginning or the end of your career.
So on that note, what will happen if we go to a part-time legislature, Randy?
Well, I think that just makes the problem worse.
Love Boat gets worse?
Yeah. Then it turns into one of those other shows, those spin-offs that never made it.
Right.
I think the part-time legislature, there's a misunderstanding of what a legislator does from day to day. Mostly we are the voice for the people. And there's talk about, oh, you only spend 100 days in, working. That's not true. That's not true at all. I worked longer hours and harder when I was in office than I did when I was in corporate America. And I worked pretty hard back then. Mostly, you're the voice of the people, and we are the advocates for the executive branch of the government. We are the teller, the customer service window for the executive branch. People don't call the governor's office with an expectation that they're going to get the problem solved in a short period of time. They go to their representative or senator. So if you take that person who's representing either 90 or 250,000 people and say, we want you to only take care of those people part of the time, I think you're doing a great disservice to the people that put you there. So I'm not a supporter, obviously.
I am sympathetic to the impulse for a part-time legislature, but I honestly don't think it would be a transformational change, really. When you look at a map of the United States and you can say you color the term-limited states one color, the part-time legislature states one color, no real patterns emerge. I mean, Texas is not term-limited, but it is part-time. Texas has a lot that's going for it. California's term limits are almost as restrictive as ours, and it's in terrible shape. Illinois has no term limits. It's a little bit of a junior California in terrible shape. So part-time, I don't think that's quite the way to go. There are more transformational changes.
What kind of ideas you got?
There's been talk of lengthening term limits, and I'm not a proponent of that. But to engage in the debate, I say, there have been some who've said, well, let's give the voters kind of a trade. Give them a part-time if that's what they want, but lengthen term limits. And I say, if you're going to ever get voters to lengthen terms, you've got to increase trust in government. They still support term limits. Well, how are they going to trust government? Part-time legislature, I don't think, does it as well as a new idea, which is allow lawmakers to vote from their home district. And that would do 3 things overnight. Instead of requiring lawmakers to vote in the Capitol for every vote. Now every lawmaker would have to decide, do I want to spend more time in the Capitol or more time back in the district with the people? So the first thing is it changes the relationship between lawmakers and constituents. The second thing it does is it instantly changes every campaign. And part of the campaign competition is, hey, I'll spend more time in the legislature, or I'll spend more time in the home district than you. And the third thing that it does is it instantly changes the lobbying dynamic. Right now, the lawmakers go to where the lobbyists are, which is convenient for lobbyists. Well, this would change that to some extent. So I still favor term limits. Term limits have given us some of our greatest, term-limited legislatures have given us some of our greatest changes. Randy's signature accomplishment of right to work was with a term-limited legislature. That was great. Term-limited legislature right now is trying to grapple with the pension problem that was a legacy problem left from a non-term limited legislature. So
This sounds like a good deal for lobbyists. They'd have to hire a lot more of them, fan out across the state. Randy, are you looking for a job?
No.
Okay.
No.
What do you think of this idea?
Well, the lobby, it's an interesting idea. I want to say something, though, about this comparison to the other states thing. You compare part-time or term-limited legislature to Montana or North Dakota or something like that. I think it's a disservice to the people of Michigan. We're about the 10th biggest state, and we've got incredible regulation. We've got the Great Lakes. We are the automotive technology capital of the world, and we have things, we have workers, we are leaders because we have full-time legislature versus what's the state tree in North Dakota, like the telephone pole or something? I mean,
you don't strive to be North Dakota?
What do they have to regulate? I don't have anybody from North Dakota here, right?
Oil and gas.
Oil and gas.
I don't know. But the idea of being able to vote from home, I like it as long as you give leadership the opportunity to say we have an important vote. Not that all votes aren't important, but we have a vote where I need you in the Capitol at these times. I like the idea of being able to vote away from home. But there are complications and dynamics that change. I can't intimidate somebody that's 300 miles away from me.
Well, I guess that might be pretty good on some issues.
Not to me. You just brought up right to work, so that was not an easy one. And I don't think that would have been done if we had people all around the state.
Well, you got intimidated from someone from the other side of the state, didn't you?
No, nobody scares me,
Okay,
Chad.
well, I thought you got your arm twisted remotely.
No,
Okay.
that was that article. What was that magazine that writes stupid stuff? No offense, it's not yours.
That's what I was asking
I knew
about.
that before you said that.
But what about in our society? We're becoming disconnected from each other. The idea that that we just start voting remotely and eye-chatting discussion, caucus meetings or something. I mean, that sounds like it would just perpetuate the lack of interpersonal relationships.
But this would, the thing about the way we think of the idea is nobody would be required to vote from the district. Just like right now, nobody's really required to keep office hours, but if they're smart, they'll keep office hours. And so we might find that the most effective lawmakers are the ones who spend time in the Capitol working with their colleagues. We might find something different. We might find that the more effective lawmakers who are spending more of the time being closer to their constituents have the freshest ideas and can be more persuasive with them.
That could be. I don't want anybody to underestimate how important relationships are in this business. And term limits has already made it very difficult to build long-term, strong relationships. The trust that you talk about starts at the Capitol. We need to be able to know each other and trust each other. And imagine saying that a family dinner where everybody sits around and talks about their day is the same as if everybody had an iPhone and were back in their bedroom having a family dinner. It's not going to be the same thing. I think we need to be together more so than less. And again, the administration is here. Those people work in offices next to each other. They talk. They're strong. The lobbyists, they get together.
Would you require lawmakers to spend more time in Lansing than they do now, or do you think it's about the right amount of time that they spend?
I think it's pretty close to the right amount. And again,
So we're getting about the optimum results right now.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
Given the people that we have and the limiting nature of term limits, we probably are getting the best result that we can. But I think we need to extend that. Like I think I was clear about that. Either restructure or extend them. Keep term limits, that's okay with me, but just make it at a point where you can have that experience that I think is necessary to make the best decisions. We've got great public servants. We have communities that have sent their best and brightest to come up to Michigan, come to the Capitol, and do the best they can for the constituents that they serve. And we do a disservice to those people by cutting them down and saying they're not important, let's take their benefits away. You know, those institutions I'm very proud to have been a part of. And I gave up a lot to be there, as did a lot of my colleagues. So this respect thing that the legislature doesn't get very often, I think starts with people in rooms like this that know the kind of work that they do and should stand up and be proud of the people that work in that Capitol.
But isn't it really easy to demagogue the legislature?
For you guys.
Touche. So I covered the Missouri legislature, which was part-time and term limited. They had a bigger House, and they had a filibuster in the Senate. You want to talk about a rodeo? The Speaker of the House at the time, a guy named Rod Jetton, was also a political consultant, and that was his other job besides his little $36,000 a year part-time legislative job. And he got several state senators elected, and guess what? He had his own caucus in the Senate, basically, that could hold the place up. And you want to talk about pulling hairs out? I mean, your predecessor at the time, or your colleague there, Charlie Shields, he would not have. He just went nuts at times. And so I've seen this in another state, and I'm not sure that it's going to look as beautiful as being portrayed right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
Oh, it looks like we're getting close to a wrap here. The next session is on a report card on President Trump, which I'm sure will be glowing.
Is that it? Are we done? All right. Well, you do have some great panelists coming up, so I look forward to that myself.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Randy, thanks a lot.
Sounds like this is going to be an issue that's going to continue to be discussed for a while.
I agree. You know, I actually like what Randy said. Normally you would think that the ballot box would be enough for term limits, but that doesn't seem to work. So it's a very interesting topic that I think will continue.
Right.
And I am very interested to see what this report card panel has to say. Nolan, are you going to make it a very interesting conversation for us?
We'll see.
Yeah.
Kick it over to you, Nolan.
Okay, well, it's early, isn't it? So we're here to grade the new president, Donald Trump. After 100 days, the Detroit News, we gave him a C grade based on the team he had assembled and some of the regulatory relief he'd already begun, as well as some of the business-friendly policies he'd put in place, and marked him down, of course, for the still chaotic nature of the White House, as well as some of the distracting, divisive policies he put. Lots happened since those first 100 days, and in fact, I think the stretch between those first 100 days and today have been more eventful, perhaps even than the first by the first measure. And so, I'm not sure that C still holds up for us. It just seems like there's too much out of control, too many ends being chased in the White House today. But I'm interested in hearing from our panelists, Mike McGee and Lena Epstein, on what their grade is for those first 100 days. Mike, let's start with you.
Sure. And we all thought your C was sort of a gentleman's C. We understood where you were coming from.
No, I mean, that's where we were honest on. I felt there was enough good balanced against the bad. It was an honest grade, so,
Well,
from our point.
I would say actually, from one perspective, for incomplete, not for impeachment, I think his domestic agenda. He's had some success with Neil Gorsuch, of course, which was good, and that, relatively speaking, was easy, but all of the issues you pointed out in your editorial are there. On foreign policy, I think, especially after yesterday, I think you'd have to give him a much lower grade. I think that the issue yesterday really was not so much about climate as it was about American leadership. And we seem to be ceding leadership across the world in this case, the Chinese, and in some case to Germany and France. So lower grade on foreign policy.
Except, Mike, I mean, the reality is, had that climate treaty been negotiated through the normal process and normal protocols and vetted and ratified by the Senate, there would have been no ability to repeal it yesterday. So if you take a look at the unilateral nature in which Barack Obama acted on so many different issues, he opened the door for Donald Trump to do the same. And it's a lesson that you don't want to give one president the power you don't want the next president to have, because once that power exists in the office, it stays there. So, Lena, what's your grade? You still high on the president? I know you've been a big defender.
I would give the president an A-.
A-. So you're naming that baby Donald, right?
Well, for a girl, I think that would be awfully unusual.
It would be. It's an unusual time.
The citizens of America spoke up very loud and clear in 2016 that they felt left behind and frustrated by a government that wasn't properly serving them. We elected a man that was not as eloquent as President Obama, not a professional orator and beautiful in his language and his delivery. We elected a man that spoke to the hearts and minds of what the Americans were asking for. And so in the days and weeks and couple of months since he took office, I think we've seen the same man. He hasn't changed in his demeanor. What we saw along the campaign trail is what we got and what we're getting now as president. And I think it's important to remember that he doesn't have 20 years of staff, political staff to bring with him. This has been the school of hard knocks for him. And it's been extraordinarily humbling for him as a man, as a human, and as our president. He has America's best interest in mind. And it's an extraordinarily divided, divisive political sphere that we find ourselves in. And I think that has been the greatest challenge that he has faced overall.
But Lena, I mean, we're not grading him on his campaign, and certainly he spoke to something in America that a lot of us didn't get, and he won the election. We're talking about that time from January 20th until today. You can't find any areas to mark him down on?
Oh no, that's why I gave him an A-.
Okay.
I have been a strong supporter of the president, and at the same time, I am an independent woman and have my own mental agency. At times, we do disagree. I would have probably handled yesterday differently. Certainly when it comes to the Great Lakes, I feel very strongly about funding our beautiful Great Lakes as we look out over these straits and the crown jewel of Michigan. It's okay for us to disagree. President Trump wanted to eliminate political correctness. It's okay for us to sit and have differing ideas and do that with respect and diplomacy.
But you also have to, Mike, you have to take a look at effectiveness. And there have been a lot of policies you might look at or actions you might look at and say, you could agree with the basic premise of that policy, but the way in which he governs and conducts himself, I think costs him a lot of support that he might otherwise get.
Well, I think that's right. And I think there were a lot of people in November who were doubtful, about him, but sort of voted for him and thought, let's let the guy grow in the office and let's see what happens. You were very, very tough in November in your editorial endorsing Gary Johnson.
I'll bring that up.
But I think you were right in terms of judging that his personality characteristics of being at least unpredictable. I think you might have used some tougher words than that. That has been borne out. He doesn't seem to have grown in the office. That was manifest, I think, a little bit yesterday. And I think that's exactly why you see people like William Crystal this week in the Weekly Standard saying, folks, it's time for us to confront it. We have what he called a Trump problem. And he called upon people on both sides at conferences like this, where we're talking about civility and we're talking in a civil way, calling upon all of us as Americans to confront that truth and to figure out where do we go from here, how do we live up to our responsibilities as citizens.
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with what he did yesterday in terms of that climate accord. Again, I thought a pact like that should have been debated in the Senate. And I also thought that yesterday he should have made the statistical case against the accord. Obama's EPA vetted it and said probably won't make a significant impact on climate change, but it was an important optical thing to do. Well, that's an expensive optical thing. But instead, I mean, it was this, again, this very divisive, bombastic announcement that he didn't sell. And, you know, at sometimes, personally, I'm not convinced we don't have a madman in the White House, Lena.
When we take a step back and we look at the environment in which we live, the media environment, the media spectacle that Donald Trump created, but the media also helped to contribute to, it's very difficult as individuals for us to discern exactly what is going on in the White House as citizens. And this is a president that is extraordinarily hardworking. And I do read the White House press briefings on a daily basis, and a lot of the good work that he's doing isn't covered by the national media. For example, Yom Ha'atzmaut is the Israeli Independence Day, and the administration recognized it for the first time in modern history under several administrations. And the media had no interest in covering that. Mm-hmm. There are so many examples of the president doubling down on commitments made to the manufacturing sector, to the agricultural communities, to the rural areas of this country, to our cities. It scares me very deeply in my heart and soul that there are some people that hate Donald Trump more than they love America. And how are we going to reconcile that and move the country forward in a good direction for all of our best interests?
Hey, you know, and I agree with some of that. I'll tell you, this whole resistance movement, I think, is damaging to the country. And I do think there have been some really dishonorable behavior amongst people in my profession and amongst the media outlet. Does seem to be a fanaticism at work, and you know, everything's a scandal, whether he makes a typo in a tweet. But it's not like he hasn't invited a lot of this. I mean, he has made himself Velcro for these attacks, and you know, there is a lack of wisdom in picking such a overt war with the press.
Well, when he does do things that, what was the tweet the other night on Kosese, when he sort of fumbled the tweet in the middle of the night, that's been going on long enough, and his folks have been trying to get him under control. The fact that he cannot seem to get that under control, I think we've gone beyond growing in the office, and I think that's why people like Crystal say that's a problem. And coming back to the climate, as I say, I agree with you completely that whether America hits the standards or not is really going to be determined by what our utilities do and what industry does. What's important about that is for 75 years, there's been a consensus, left and right, that the world is a better place when America is leading it. And it appears now to our allies, certainly in Europe, and I'll bet you they're dancing in Beijing, that America is ceding that role. And I'm of the camp that says the world is better off when America leads it, and he needs to engage, and that's a problem.
Lena, do you get any sense that he's learning from his mistakes? I mean, as Michael said, people have been trying to get him off Twitter since he came into office. And, if I were Twitter, I'd be having a campaign ready. We're the first, social network that brought down a president. I mean, you just can't stay off it. Do you see any signs of learning?
I see tremendous signs of learning, but I think the Twitter conversation, it's going to get old after a while. This is a man who has had decades of a successful career. He's set in his ways, in certain ways, as we all are as we proceed in our lives. The Twitter conversation, guys, we could talk about this forever. We could complain for the next several years ahead about the tweeting, but at the end, that has been in many ways arguably one of his most critical tools to communicate with the folks that elected him. The American citizens, and we're all guilty of this, we can take a news story, for example, his very, very diplomatic presentation to the Muslim leaders of the world. He can have a great day, and his ratings can jump. His plan in Syria and his very bold action can garner very positive support in one day, and how fickle we are in the next. I think it's important for us to recognize that a successful Trump presidency, a successful Obama presidency, a successful American presidency lends itself to a successful America. in the end, we can dislike the man, or like the man, and in the end, I think we all need to find ways to be supportive of him. And it's very okay to disagree. It's necessary. That's the beautiful thing about this country. But he is learning, Nolan. I do assure you of that.
I don't disagree with that, but I think there's some responsibility on the president himself to be successful rather than, and to speak to all the people. Lena talked about him reaching the people who elected him, but at some point, he's got to talk to the people who didn't elect them and convince them that he's capable of leading the country. He seems to have no interest in that.
You know, I was thinking as Lena was talking about how, in a way, we all have to kind of gather around and help him to succeed. That sort of sounds like it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah. Or to shut one up.
You know, I think a couple of the people that I've seen lately on this topic, I think that David Frum, who is certainly no liberal, worked for President Bush 43, has been out there quite actively, and particularly on the Twitter issue, saying, look, he has tendencies himself toward, authoritarianism. And, when you tweet at the union leader on the air conditioning, plant in Indiana, and criticize that person, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, that has consequences for that person. And Frum's got, people can Google it, and he's got a ton of videos out there. You can look at his analysis of what does authoritarianism look like in the 21st century. He doesn't look like 1930. That's not going to happen. But the use of those types of tools and the continual attack on the media, which is one of the checks and balances, that sort of thing, you don't see yet any, in my mind, you don't really see a signal that he's learned to live within that system or that he's leaning in that way.
Okay, we've got 1 minute left, time for one more question, and we keep our answers brief if we can. I talked to Michael Beschloss yesterday on the stage in the theater, and he said he'd not seen in history a president who had gotten off to this bad a start. He couldn't quite answer the question of how he might recover. Michael, will this president survive?
Oh, I think he will. I think he'll survive certainly for his 4 years, but he's certainly making it hard on himself to get anything done.
Lena, do you think he'll be impeached, or will he pull this out?
Oh no, the impeachment story is off the table at this point, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that a lot will happen in the years ahead under a Trump presidency. I think he will maybe go down in history as the most controversial president, but I'm very optimistic about the future. I think it is overly simplistic to say, but as Americans, we all do need to work together. We need to find the common trends. We need to find our commonalities, and we need to align ourselves as best we can and support the president, every president in American history, including President Trump.
Okay, well, Mike McGee, Lena Epstein, thank you.
Thank you.
Tammy, Dennis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All I can say, Tammy, is that I wish that Lena was my law school professor.
I know.
Because that A- was very generous.
It's very, very generous. Yes, yes. Well, now we're going to have another very interesting discussion, and with good friends of both of us.
Very good friends. Reggie Turner, good morning.
Good morning, Dennis.
Sheila Cockrell, who I affectionately refer to as Coach. And Stephen is looming around somewhere. Mr. Henderson, good morning.
Hello.
We look forward to hearing you guys chat with us a little bit about the upcoming Detroit city elections.
Yeah. All right. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
How are you? Everyone's still here? Everyone's awake this morning? Before we get to Detroit elections, let's follow up a little on what we just heard. Just to be sure, you guys are also in on the A- for the president?
Please. No.
Maybe a B+, right?
No. We have a mentally ill person as president of the United States who is actually being run by the alt-right. We have really got President Bannon, not President Trump.
Yeah, I can't tell if she was grading the obstruction of justice or the drunk tweeting, but whatever.
I think Sheila has it right.
So let's talk about November of 2017, which is coming up pretty quick. Also, the primaries will be at the end of the summer. I said something in a column the other day that I think is a sort of good starting point for this discussion. it sort of gave the mayor, Mayor Duggan, credit for the things that he's done to move the needle on some really critical issues in the city. But I also said that for a lot of people in the city, things are not different. Things are not better. If they look around themselves in their neighborhoods, it'd be hard for them to say what's different about Detroit today. And that's not to say that things haven't changed. It's just that it hasn't reached them. And I sort of went further and said, if this mayor were facing a credible, experienced challenger, I think he would have a real race on his hands because of that. That somebody who could say, or at least promise, the idea that things could move faster in the vast stretches of the city that aren't benefiting, that person might be really appealing to voters. What do you think about that?
Well, Steve, I think, as you point out, there does not appear to be a well-financed, credible challenger with great appeal either to the business community or to organized labor in this election. And so the incumbent has a very strong advantage at this point in time. But I think you could turn it around and say that the fact that there isn't such a candidate facing the mayor is in part because there's not a view that something needs to change. There is not a view among any of the major constituencies that for example, this mayor isn't meeting goals on important issues like economic development or organizing city government or concern for the people. And so there's not a push for someone strong to come in and challenge him in this race.
Yeah.
Well, yes, my sense, I share Reggie's perspective, but I think there really is. People want things to move faster than they appear to be, and people want the narrative to be more in line with the kind of message you give as opposed to this, everything's great in Detroit. Detroit's launched, cool, let's, we don't need to focus on this anymore kind of thinking. I do think that one of the things I've heard from people is there's a real willingness to give the incumbent mayor time. Even though he said, I want to get things done fast, it didn't take 5 minutes to get into the situation. It took 60 years of disinvestment. It took a bankruptcy. So I think there's a sense that let's change some of the conversation so that we're really constantly reflecting that we're not done yet, but let's keep going. I thought the mayor's presentation yesterday was the singular most significant presentation about the city and where it's at and where it's been that I've heard in, 25 years.
Well, we'll talk about what it was in that speech that you think sort of distinguished it.
I think to have the mayor of the city of Detroit to literally link the history of race, housing segregation, and economic inequality and lack of access to jobs as the real narrative as to what happened to the city is really an important one. And I just think it was really a groundbreaking statement. I think it's an opportunity for a regional conversation on the divisions that have occurred, that have been shaping our political life for at least my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I think the speech was really a dynamic way for the mayor to indicate that he understands the history of the city of Detroit. He understands Detroiters, and that he is a mayor for all Detroiters and understands the reason that we need to continue to make progress in breaking down barriers in this city because there are legacies from the history of discrimination in this city that still need to be overcome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of legacies, this is an important anniversary in the city, the 50th anniversary of the '67 rebellion. Talk about how that anniversary and the issues that still sort of linger from it might frame the electoral mood this year in Detroit. Is it going to play much of a role?
I have not heard sort of the kind of community. I've heard a lot of people who want to reflect, who are my age or my generation, for whom the '67 rebellion was literally a seminal occurrence that shaped the direction of your view of the world, of what could or should be done. I think my generation really does want to reprocess the experience to understand sort of the dynamic about race in the city at that time. Younger people want to look at it from the point of view of history, but in and of itself, I don't see the commemoration as being a dynamic in the election.
Yeah.
I don't either. You know, my dad was a Detroit police officer, and in 1967, I didn't see him for about 2 weeks during the course of the rebellion, and he hardly came home at all. It was a major turning point in my consciousness of the division that could exist in our nation and in the city in which I was growing up. Fortunately, the Detroit Police Department is a much different department than it was in those days, and I think although the 1967 events should be remembered, I don't think that there's a view that something like that could happen again, or that the police department is an occupying army in the way that it was viewed in 1967.
Yeah.
And that progress, the credit for that progress goes to a series of mayors, from Coleman Young to Dennis Archer, and moving forward, mayors who've tried to ensure that the police department is geared toward building relationships in the community rather than building division.
Yeah. I want to give some time to talk about the challenger, the main challenger, I think, to Mayor Duggan, State Senator Coleman Young II. What does he have to do to really push in this race? I mean, you don't want to discount somebody. I mean, we talked about the advantage that we think the mayor has. Is there an opportunity for him to break through and really push Mayor Duggan in the race?
Well, I think the first thing, if you running for any office, but certainly running for mayor and mayor of Detroit, it has to be a contest about ideas, about a vision. And the first thing you got to do is show up in order to have that debate.
Sure.
I know a consortium of people are creating videos that are going to be available to the public to hear from candidates across all city elections directly. He was given that opportunity. He didn't take it. To my knowledge, he hasn't been up here. If there's any place where, if you're a serious candidate, you want to be in play and be contending with your vision, it's at this policy conference.
Yeah.
And he's not here.
He's not here.
Yeah, the business community has always had significant impact on mayoral elections in the city of Detroit. You could argue that there was a time when labor had just as much impact, but that was in the days when the city had 16 automobile factories inside the city limits of the city of Detroit working on 3 shifts,
Right.
and there was a very strong labor force in the city. Today, the business community is key to the election of Detroit mayors, and a candidate who fails to reach out to the business community by showing up at a conference like this, in my view, is missing the boat.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about city council. You know a little bit about that.
I do.
We're now going to face the first re-election campaign for the district representatives of council, the first time we've had districts in almost 100 years. Do you see any threat to any of the incumbents? Are we going to see some real tight races?
I think there's one race it's going to be where the interest is going to lie. It's going to be in the 5th District with incumbent Mary Sheffield and Jewel Ware, Commissioner Jewel Ware from the Wayne County Commission. I think that's the race that's going to take up a lot of the oxygen. I think in the other races there are some credible candidates, particularly in the at-large race. But I think the incumbents are going to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
I agree. The only other named candidate running against an incumbent is Virgil Smith in the race against George Cushingberry.
Sure.
But Virgil has obviously had some issues that may make it difficult for him to catch on.
Do you think that the narrative about how well progress is reaching the neighborhoods could play a bigger role in the council races, especially the district council races, than it even does in the mayoral race, because they're closer to the people who may not be seeing progress? Reggie?
I think you have a point, but there has been a fair amount of progress in recent years in the city of Detroit. I mean, I think if you look at downtown and midtown, there is clearly a new buzz, a new sense of investment in downtown and midtown. And I now have to look where I'm going when I walk down the street in downtown Detroit, because you actually bump into people, right? I mean, the sidewalks are crowded, storefronts are opening up. I think that there's a palpable sense that the city is moving forward.
Yeah, but if you're in the 3rd district, right, northeast, it doesn't look the same, and the people who live there don't experience all that stuff the same, do they?
I think the district council structure, which I've personally never been a fan of, but I think that the district council members have literally done a really good job at bringing the city hall more directly in relationship to the neighborhoods. Because actually, I mean, there is so much going on in so many of these neighborhoods. Because the other thing I think we need to remember is that there's a lot of foundation investment in the neighborhoods that is literally, as people experience it, whether it's in Brightmoor or near the in the area around the Redford Theater. I mean, there's momentum that is not just confined to downtown and midtown, and there is community engagement. I think the Planning Development Department for getting grassroots input on the direction, the rebuilding of communities. People are engaged. So I know a lot of people, like we had a Citizen Detroit session, and in general, when people were sort of grading, how do you feel about change in the community? To date, people were like, we'll give the mayor a C, but the C was about, there's still so much more to do,
Sure.
We're all doing it. It wasn't like anti the mayor.
Yeah, well, I mean, in some ways, it's almost like the mayor is a victim of his own success, right? The more that downtown and midtown sort of gleam, the more people in sort of further reaches of the city are reminded of what could come, but what's not here.
Well, the mayor has tried to take leadership on education issues, and unfortunately we did not get the Detroit Education Commission that he and so many others sought as we were trying to create school reform in the city of Detroit. The key to really bringing Detroit back is to fill up this 140 square miles with a significant number of additional people. The only way we're going to attract people back to those neighborhoods that have been emptied over the course of the last few decades is to have a good, strong school system.
Sure.
So we have to go back and work at that again. We need to figure out the long-term solution for the Detroit public schools so that people feel comfortable raising families in the city of Detroit.
Do schools become an issue in the election this year?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's people are looking for, I think, to see how the new superintendent does. There was a great deal of support that I saw for Alicia Merriweather, and I think people are looking, to build on that.
Yeah. We've got about a minute left. Prediction, what's the margin?
Well, the largest margin, I think, was in the re-election campaign for Mayor Dennis Archer, where he won with 83% of the vote. I think that'll be a challenge for anyone to match, but I think it could possibly be, a similar margin.
What about you?
I think it'll be significant. This mayor has a great deal of support. But what's important is more people have to get out and vote. Only 25% of the electorate voted in the primary in 2013. That's a real small number of people, narrowing the choices, whether it's for mayor, council, or whatever.
Yeah, and if Dennis Archer had a better campaign manager in his re-election campaign, probably would have gotten 100%.
Would have gotten 100? Yeah, all right. Okay, all right, Reggie and Sheila, thanks very much.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very interesting conversation. And, as we look to future elections, one of the things I think that even we as a chamber should get involved in is establishing a pipeline of young talent interested in politics, because the way that politics are going, and at this moment being tremendously uncivilized,
right.
I think it's very important to have a qualified pipeline of interested candidates, people interested in politics.
We saw this year with the young emerging leaders who are joining us, they're interested in policies there. So there's going to be a great new future crop of leaders for us for political office.
I look forward to it. And now, Ryan, you can take it away as we talk about 2020.
Thank you very much. Mayor, how you doing, sir?
Wonderful, thank you.
Poppy Shostak?
Great.
Good morning,
thank
how you doing?
Excellent.
First, I'd like to thank you for your advice on the way out here. The mayor said, make sure they don't put tape on your microphone. Obviously, you've got some experience in this, huh?
I think there was a threat at me, you know.
Oh, no. So we're talking about 2020, 3 years away from the election. So in 2013, actually, I'll do what Live and Good did. Let's look at everybody here. 2013, how many people in here predicted that Donald Trump would be president of the United States?
2013.
One? Oh, come on, really? Really, in 2013?
Not 13.
Okay, so we don't have one liar out here, is what we're. So obviously, we're living in pretty unpredictable times.
We are.
So we have to keep that in mind as we're talking about this, right? I'd be interested in knowing what you think first the political environment is going to be in 2020, because the political environment drives the candidacies, not the other way around. Let's start with disruptive voters, angry voters, voters who voted for change in 2016, voted for change in 2008. What is their mood going to be like, you think, in 2020? Are they going to be angrier? Are they going to be satiated? And how might that affect the landscape in 2020?
I think from the Democratic point of view, it's already started to begin the groundwork of working to bring a vote out in 2018. And, well, in fact, this year, 2017, in the race for mayor, 2018 for the race for United States Senate and the governor's race and others, and then for 2020.
So specifically, how do they appeal to those voters who were so desperate for change they voted for a junior senator in 2008 and for Donald Trump in 2012?
Well, we've been doing a lot of listening, which is what, there was a lot of concern that people were being taken for granted and voters stayed home. I mean, traditional Democratic voters that wanted to be respected, et cetera, didn't feel that way.
That's true, but how about the change voters who came out overwhelmingly for Obama in 08 and for Trump in 16? What does your party do to get them? And what will their mood be like, you think, in 3 years from now?
I think their mood is going to be one to support the Democratic nominee in 2020, because I believe the person who runs will have a very close, upfront, and personal relationship, at least that will be felt in every corner of the United States, every state. Nobody's going to be taken for granted, and it's going to be working hard to bring out that vote.
Gotcha, sir. Thank you. Bobby?
Well, I think there's a couple perspectives that we could put on the table here. 2016 was a response to Donald Trump of all Americans that are angry, disappointed with government, whether it's in the state of Michigan or it's in Florida or California. He won states and turned out voters, many first-time voters, many independents, many Democrats, because everybody on both sides, this is not a Republican versus Democrat thing, this was a disappointment in government. And that disappointment still exists today. And that angst and anger still exists today. And the discourse that's going on today, obviously, is of great concern.
Do you think the public discourse will be better in 2020 than it is now?
I pray, I hope it is. I mean, this cannot continue. I mean, anybody involved in politics that has any influence whatsoever, past or present, leading into the future, needs to speak out and say, we need to behave. We can get along. We're one country. We have the same beliefs on most topics, 80, 90% of things. And there's no reason to have the amount of angst and anger at each other that you're hearing coming out of the halls of Congress that works its way across the country. And it's enough is enough, and I think the country is saying that. And if we don't stop it, there'll be another, angry election. And an angry election is not what's good for America. You want an American election that's a model for the world of unity coming together. I mean, what's going on today post the election,
right,
as if it's still going on.
So would we be more or less united, do you think, in 3 years?
My hope would be, or my wish, if I could push a button, would be for America to have had the benefit of being here on Mackinac Island for the Detroit Regional Chamber. The civility aspect, the young lady who spoke and talked about putting people at a table with different, just listening to each other and working through things, that's what it's going to take for America to be great. There's a lot of fear in the United States today, and that fear comes from what is being done that has not been sold, has not been vetted, has not been talked about. And there's fear when you pick up a paper or when you watch national television and you hear leaders from other countries they've been our strong allies expressing discontent and fear. And then you got somebody over in North Korea who seems to be rather unstable in terms of what he's prepared to do. Or appears to. We don't need that. We need a stronger America where everybody comes together. That's the civility aspect that the chamber talked about in terms of what we need to do as citizens. And Bobby, it goes to what you were just
What a round of applause for Sandy Baru and his team for making that
Oh,
one of the
yeah.
pillars. What do you think, Mr. Mayor, the biggest issue will be on the minds of voters 3 years from now? What will drive the campaign? Will it be it's the economy stupid? Will it be terrorism? Will it be health care? What do you think would be the biggest issue?
I don't think we can project at the moment. Healthcare could be off the table if the United States Senate goes in and works collegially on both sides of the aisle in the Senate and changes what came out of the House. If the House bill is what continues to be before all of Americans, then I think health care will be there. And it's going to be it's an issue that the way it's presented from the House and what they passed, it hurts the supporters that Trump has, President Trump, that he was able to win his election.
Mm-hmm.
So if he keeps doing that.
That'll be the issue? What do you think, Bobby?
Well, look, it's always jobs, the economy, and of course, the fear of terrorism. But I think there's
Sometimes it's change.
Or change,
What do you
yeah,
think it's gonna be this time?
Indeed. Well, I think it's really hard to predict that.
Mhm.
To give a quick example. Fall 2007, John McCain, the presumptive candidate, ran out of money, flying on his commercial flights to New Hampshire, all washed up, finished.
He was toast.
Fall of 07, ask anybody in the room, Hillary Clinton was going to be the first woman president of the United States. 1 year later, Barack Obama, John McCain in the election, and Barack Obama becomes president of the United States for the next 8 years. So it's really hard to predict what's on people's minds and what's going to really matter. Nobody could have predicted that Donald Trump would have, brought out that voter. But I think, look, at the end
Well, we
of
got
the
to
day,
say something up here, man.
Yeah, but at
So
the
what do you think would be the biggest issue?
Thank you. I think the biggest issue is going to be jobs. Will you, as an American wage earner, breadwinner for your family, is your life improving? Is the policies of the present administration helping you move forward in life, being able to provide for your family? And yes, healthcare and other things but I really think it always gets back to jobs and the economy.
I think that is, there's a lot of reasonableness in your observation, especially if the Democrats win the United States Senate in 2018, because they're going to be focused on bringing jobs back and creating the kind of climate and the like. And if there's a few votes changed in the United States House, we may not get it back, but if we get enough votes to make things tighter, then I believe there's going to be more of a maybe forced discussion where people are going to have to work together. But jobs are going to be there, and jobs is what I think President Trump was able to win on, going to people in America saying, in effect, that they have taken your jobs. But if you elect me, I'm going to give you your jobs back.
It's a powerful
They
message.
did this and they did that, and it's caused a division. We need to come together as a country.
So we've talked about as much as we can, looked ahead to see what the environment's going to be like. Let's talk a little bit about the candidates. If you could take off your blue jersey and put on your pundit's hat, and maybe even as kind of a early warning sign to maybe overconfident Democrats, chart out for me the most likely path to Donald Trump winning re-election. If he were to win re-election, how would that happen?
I can't think of it.
You're going to tell me there's no way Donald Trump could be re-elected?
Oh, I won't say that because I predicted he wouldn't be president today.
Okay, so we
from that
were all wrong there.
Yeah.
So factor that in. Factor how unpredictable the times we're living in. Factor how angry voters are. Factor, and we don't know what the economy is going to be like. You might not win back the Senate. What would be the path? What are the circumstances that would have to happen for Donald Trump to be reelected?
I can't see it. I really can't, Ron. And the reason is, under the current circumstances that we find ourselves, when you've got someone who is tweeting When you've got someone who says whatever it is on their mind without checking with folks who've been in politics, who understand what goes on in the House and the Senate, who understands the United States Constitution, who understands the responsibility of the president and his cabinet officers, you can't run a country like the United States of America like you're running a business. So I don't know what's going to happen.
All due respect, that person running that way became president.
That's
Why
true,
could he
but
not be reelected?
you're asking me, well, because people will see what he has done that will have hurt the country as opposed to helping the country, and the people who expected to be uplifted and they're not, that's going to make it very difficult for him to
Those
be
angry
reelected.
voters in Macomb County are going to be angrier?
I think that they're going to see the light. Remember, there was not a huge mandate coming out of Michigan. He won Michigan, he won Wisconsin, he won Pennsylvania. There's no question where he won. He did win. He is the president of the United States, but you're talking about re-election. And if he keeps doing what he's doing right now, that's
Okay.
not going to happen.
Bobby, what's the most likely path to Donald Trump being a one-term president?
Delivering on his commitments?
No, to being a one-term president.
A one-term president? Oh.
What's the path to,
He-
what does he have to avoid doing so that
Avoid
he can have a
doing-
second term?
Not living up to his commitments. Okay, and I think he's doing his best. Look, this
So far,
this discussion.
is he living up to his commitments?
Yes. Yes,
How
he
so?
is. I think he's clipping them off one at a time. He's had some challenges. I'm not here to defend how and why and what have you, but he's had challenges. He's not a traditional president. He's not a traditional CEO sitting in that office. He is clipping off on items that he ran on. You could agree or disagree with the Paris Accords yesterday, but that was on his list. He said so. He's dealing with the Veterans Administration problems. He's dealing with tax reform. These things are going to begin to take place. But the biggest problem is he is in a swamp. And I think Democrats and Republicans agree that Washington is a swamp. And draining that swamp is not an easy task. And, you know, I doubt that he can fully drain the swamp. I mean, it's a big, bulky bureaucracy. But there's thousands
is he draining the swamp, or is he putting more alligators in it?
Well, if the alligators
about,
maybe
for
do
example,
their
he's
job,
obvious.
you know, maybe that's not so bad. But I mean, he's got to take some really difficult steps to deal with the bureaucracy and break it down and to make government somehow more accountable and more efficient. If he accomplishes, you know, a dent in that, that would be a huge accomplishment in 4 years.
Has he shown the ability to be able to do something that big, to literally change the institutions of government?
I think it's going to take all of 4 years and beyond. You know, it's
a very diplomatic
It's a big job. No, but it is a big job. I mean, you try to do it in a private company or a public company. It's a big job. This is a massive operation that's going to require a lot of skills and a lot of diplomacy. You know, and a lot of effort in disrupting the traditional way we look at things.
Thank you. Mayor, can you do the best job you possibly can with your crystal ball and handicap the Democratic field for us? What kind of person would be best to come out of this? And if you want to put names on it, please do. Who is most likely, by name or by characteristics, the type of person would be the best type of person to emerge from this race and take on Trump if he makes it 4 years?
I think the person who becomes the Democratic nominee is the one who lays out an agenda of what he or she would hope to accomplish if given the privilege of leadership, and has to listen to the constituents that he wants or she wants to vote for him or her, and see if they are responding and agree with the approach or program that the Democratic nominee will put out there for the American public. If that candidate does that, that candidate will win.
And Bobby, we have a minute left. Who is the candidate on the left that scares you the most?
Candidate on the left that scares me.
Potential candidate.
That could take on Donald Trump?
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have a name. I think that we just got to do our job and not worry about the candidate on the left. Trump's got to do his job, which I know he's trying to do. Congress has got to do their job, and Republicans will continue to be in office in 2018.
And quick answers, both of you, if you could, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being it's definitely going to happen, 1 being there's very little chance. What do you think the chances are that Donald Trump faces impeachment?
I'm waiting for the investigations. That's the lawyer, former Supreme Court justice in me. People are going to speculate. You're always going to hear both sides of it. but I want the facts. I want to see what comes out. It could be that nothing comes out that warrants anything. On the other hand, if there's anything there, it's going to really take down and hurt his presidency and the people who are involved.
You would encourage people in your own party to let the facts come to them. Don't get ahead of the facts here.
Well, it's not the people in my party that I'm referring to, the Democrats. I'm talking about the media. The media is all over the place in terms of what the speculation happens to be. I want to see what the facts are.
Good point. I take your point.
There's no there, frankly. I think.
Now, how do you know that for sure? We don't know there is there.
I think there's to the mayor's point, the media is inundating us with all kinds of speculation, all kinds of leaks, all kinds of quotes, who said, she said, what have you, and let it just play out. But when you bundle it all up, there's no there.
Thank you very much, both of you. This was a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Right, thank you.
Great job. Thank you very much. Lena, how would you grade the panel?
Definitely an A.
Okay, there we go.
They got their, Dennis, we're over halfway through the program. Can you believe that?
It's flying
just
by.
gone really fast. I love these quick turning segments and discussions.
It's amazing. And so now we're going to hear the millennials' point of view on how things went this weekend.
Talk about our future talent and possibly future politicians.
Thank you. Ingrid, take it away.
All right. Well, I like to think of myself as a borderline millennial, but I'm here with two very legitimate millennials, Peter Ghaffari and Dennis Mitchell. So thanks for coming out today. And I brought my phone in case it's easier to text each other. But anyway, I know it's your first time up here at this conference for both of you.
Yep.
First impressions, Peter?
It's been a really eye-opening experience. I think the best way to explain it, when Sandy kind of introduced this to us, he said we take leaders from across the state, public sector, private sector, not-for-profit, and we put them all on an island together for 4 days, and we let them kind of clash on their issues in a healthy space and work on issues together. And that's very much been the case from my perspective.
Dennis?
I'd agree with that. I think that we've had the chance as emerging leaders to experience conversations around entrepreneurship, some uncomfortable conversations around diversity, and then also the capital impact that the foundations and the financial institutions are making on the neighborhoods. And it's been very healthy for myself, and I'm sure Peter, to be engaged in these types of conversations overall.
Okay. So it met your expectations.
Absolutely. I told anyone who will listen to me, and this will be news for Sandy, but he's got a repeat customer in me.
Okay.
So I'll be back.
How about you?
Same
Will
here.
you be
I
back?
would definitely return.
Okay. All right. So you've experienced your first conference. I know there's millennial input on planning the conference, but if it were totally planned by millennials, what would it look like? What would be different, if anything?
Oh, giving it to me? Okay.
Janice,
I'll take it. Initially, I would think that there would be more engagement amongst the millennials with the potential mentors, because we're on an island of some of the best mentors in this area, in the region, in the state. And to have more engagement one-on-one. Of course, we do our networking, but to have some sessions with the mayor, I think that was very helpful for us to get some input on what we should do. He led a discussion, and he told us to follow what you love, do what you love. And that's something that I think is important. I would also infuse more technology. We have the ability of technology at our fingertips. Everything we do should be centered around that. I think that the conference overall, if we were to have it ran by millennials, it would probably be a little more, they would probably have more parties, of course.
More parties. I saw you both at the birthday party last night.
The parties would be centered around key issues that directly affect us as millennials and becoming future leaders. So it would be purpose in those networkings and those parties.
Okay.
Dennis, I don't know if we can handle more parties.
Hey, you stayed up last night. I didn't.
You guys look really refreshed this morning, so I'm impressed.
I think being that this is 37 years in the making and that the millennials are now sort of the emerging generation of future leaders, I know that there's surveys that go out and there's continuous improvement efforts on the conference as a whole to maximize the value for participants. I think that as millennials start to take over more presence in the conference, it'll all sort of shift in a natural way.
Sure. So, so there's really no additions that you would suggest then for your first time millennial presence. Dennis, you mentioned you touched on this as far as access to some of. There's a lot of big players here in business, politics. How accessible did you feel some of those folks were? Were you able to talk to the people that you wanted to?
Absolutely. I think that everyone here was very welcoming. And I know that coming in as a millennial, we walk in and we had a conversation around this where there's a stigma about being a millennial and how there's not this level of trust with some of the baby boomers as of yet. And that to me leads to the opportunity for more mentorship because everyone that I spoke with was very inviting. They were very open to the ideas that I had, and I look forward to working with a lot of those individuals when I make it back to Detroit.
Okay.
Yeah, I fully agree with Dennis. I think that from both sides, baby boomer, Gen X, and millennial, there's sometimes a wall put up, and Gen X and baby boomers don't feel comfortable and don't necessarily understand millennials, and the same goes up the stream. And an opportunity like this provides us the chance to we're all on the same page, we all have the same objectives, we all want Michigan to be a great competitive place with good jobs, good schools, and a place where someone would want to raise a family. And having the chance to bring everyone together and see we all have the same objectives, we just might have different ideas and methods of how to accomplish them.
Okay. I feel like I've noticed more young people coming up to the conference, but everyone's starting to look young to me, so it's hard to tell. But how do you guys have ideas about how to maybe get more of your millennial business friends to come up here? I know you guys are on a scholarship this year. It's not cheap to come up here. The lodging's costly. I thought a lot of, you have to book 3 nights at a time. I thought maybe there could be some type of program other folks could donate rooms to maybe younger attendees and kind of help ease the cost that way. What other barriers do you guys see, or are there?
I think the Chamber has done a really intentional and effective job of trying to increase their exposure to the millennial group. With things like the sponsorships, there's various young leader groups represented here at the conference, and most of them were through sponsorships from the Chamber or other organizations who are investing in the future leadership of Michigan. And so the accessibility component is definitely a key driver. Millennials generally don't have the same earning power as more experienced professionals. And so to spend the amount of money it costs to be up here is not something that millennials can readily do, balanced with all of their other life expenses. So that's sort of a hard problem to crack. There might be some options, like you'd mentioned, around a shorter program or a more affordable program for young leaders who are interested in being up here, or some more corporate partnership opportunities to help cover some of the additional costs.
Okay, no, that's great ideas. I also wanted to think a little bit beyond the island, and I know you're both working in the Detroit area. Do you guys have some thoughts about how to attract more millennial talent, folks in their 20s and 30s to Detroit? Have you guys been involved with any efforts to do that, or do you have thoughts as to how maybe the city could work to draw that age group? I feel like there's a lot of young college grads, a lot of interns around the city. There's a lot of youth, a lot of energy downtown. I see it every day, which is great, but maybe not as many more mid-career professionals.
So I am directly aligned with attracting talent for my company, and part of the the benefit to that is that you bring diverse ideas to the table. So when you bring in young talent, you have the opportunity to expand on processes that the company may have not have had in the past. As Peter mentioned, we may look at things a different way. So attracting talent through our one-on-one engagement as millennials and spreading the word is one key thing. But then also as an employer, you have to be direct in who you're targeting to bring to your organization. So it may require that you change the landscape of your business a little bit, or just change the work environment overall. Because millennials, we have a different work ethic. So adjusting to that work ethic and I think that would be beneficial to any employer who's looking to attract talent. Detroit is on the rise, as we know. I think it's important to spread the word outside of Detroit, outside of Michigan. When you go to other cities in other states, they still don't understand how much progress we've made in the city. So when we as millennials can go out and spread that word, I think it has a greater impact in 2017.
I know you said you're part of attracting talent to your company. Are you finding there's more interest right now in coming to Detroit and opportunities here?
Absolutely. Nationwide, attracting talent is something that I'm focused on, but specifically in Detroit, like I said, it's the cool, hip place to be right now, but what happens when it's not that cool, hip place anymore? How do you retain that talent? So I spend a lot of time focusing on not only attracting by making sure that everyone is educated on some of the great things that are happening in the city, but then by also expanding and creating a career path for those individuals, because it's one thing to come to Detroit, you'll have many transplants that come, but what do they do when they get here, and how does the landscape look to a millennial maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now? Painting that picture is important.
Peter, what do you say?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Mayor Duggan said more than once the DTE reports show that this year there have been more utility turn-ons than ever before, and we're net positive. So we would expect to see a population increase within the city this year. I think that the biggest challenge is retaining those people once they move on to the next stage of their life, whether they have family or kids. The city is not a desirable place to raise and educate your children right now because the state of the schools is so poor relative to some of the really good public school districts in the surrounding communities.
That's something actually I wanted to ask you guys. I write a lot about education, so it's of interest to me what young folks like yourself are thinking along those lines. It's a fun, hip place to live, to be downtown. And I know there's more and more young couples who are looking to still stay in the city and find a school, and hopefully things turn around. But have you guys thought about, I don't know if you live in the city or not, but I mean, is that in your long-term plan?
I've lived in the city for about 2 years, and I've had neighbors with young kids who have left for the reason that they don't want their kids to go to Detroit public schools. There's no good alternatives in the city, and that's a shame because there have been some really good people who are committed to the city and love being there, but also they weigh the balance and their interest is in raising a family, and it's just not going to happen in the city right now.
Okay. So I'm born and raised in Detroit. I still live in Detroit. I tell people I am Detroit because I'm one of those people who have never left.
Okay.
And I see that it's important to have the school system because I was able to go through the school system at a time of which it was starting to transition in the schools that I graduated from, one of which is Renaissance and the other is Randolph Career and Tech Center. When you focus on jobs and you focus on vocational education, I think that helps a family who's looking to raise young children. So when we as employers start to deploy more resources into the school system to help rebuild it back up to what it was at a great time in the city, it's something that you'll start to see the needle transition. Now I know we have a long way to go to get the school system back to where it needs to be, but I just ask that the Detroit residents stay patient, stay hopeful, because it is something it has to change, so it's going to.
Amen, yeah, totally agree.
And the only thing I would add to that is, and Sheila Cockrell said it earlier, and I've heard it many times before, none of these issues happened overnight, and so to expect overnight results is unrealistic.
Sure, right. But it does seem like there is a lot of positive
Absolutely,
momentum
there's no
right
question.
now. So.
Like I said, you see the corporate partners really rallying behind Randolph Career and Tech Center now because we see the need in that community, the Winship community. And the ability to take that school and make it focused on the skilled trades is something that's tremendous. It's something that's been done before. And when you have a public and private partnership, you can really have a greater impact in the community.
Okay. So I think we're getting close to our time, but any final takeaways from your few days up here that you'll take back with you, Peter?
Well, we're getting homework, I understand.
Yes.
And I think I have an idea of what it is, and not necessarily the assignment itself, but there is some continuity expected. You know, the regional chamber makes an investment by bringing future leaders, emerging leaders to this conference, and so it's really on us to carry the word back in our respective industries and regions to make sure that other young people who weren't up here know about what we're trying to accomplish and hopefully can get involved in future years.
I agree with that. I think that the burden is on our group now to take the word back and explain to some of our colleagues, some of our friends, and say, hey, Mackinac, the Mackinac Policy Conference is somewhere that you need to be. It's somewhere where you can make a difference and that your voice will be heard.
Okay. These guys are great. Anyone want to adopt a millennial here? They're good. So, hey, thanks, Janice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, this next segment is the one that I've been most excited about.
I'm excited because I never made it actually downtown this year, so I want to hear what was going on down there.
We get stuck here in the hotel running the conference, and then we have to wait until afterwards to hear everything. But I think there's probably many who are now saying, oh, was Marcy Brogan anywhere near me the other
I see
night?
a couple people running out of the room right now.
Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much. Well, this is a first, isn't it? He has a face. Thanks for tuning in with us, Marcy and Matt. I liken this to our taxi cab confessions. What happened and what do you feel comfortable sharing with us? What was the buzz around town this week?
Well, Tim Feifei.
Oh, good heavens.
Let's see. I think the biggest buzz was probably about marijuana, the marijuana ballot.
The literal buzz.
The literal buzz, yes.
I didn't smell any.
You didn't?
I work around downtown a lot, and it wafts through downtown quite openly. But that wasn't
I
the
agree with
smell I was
Marcy. A
smelling.
lot of people are anticipating a lot of really bad puns between now and Election Day next year.
Yes.
And now, Mackinac people talk about an issue like this in very strategic terms. What types of voters will a ballot initiative bring up? And I think when they leave the island, they talk about things like that a little bit differently.
Yes.
But that was one of the things we heard about. And I think, in terms of off the agenda, we heard a lot about politics more than we would with this group assembled in any other way. When you go to the DAC and you see people having lunch who attend this conference, they're not talking about politics all the time. But here at this conference, it's sort of the lowest common denominator. And so it's the only time a lot of these people are going to talk about the governor's race until they're up here next year. And that's kind of unique to Mackinac.
And talking about legislation and ballot initiatives, Tuesday was made for quite a raucous start with Lieutenant Governor Calley and his band of pranksters marching up the hill, chanting and carrying on.
And causing a horse stampede.
Yes, it was fantastic. A little piece of Nat sound in one of our stories was the stable master asking them all to hush it down. The horses are getting a little upset, but they carried on.
Apparently the way to get young talent employed in Michigan now is to give them little blue pieces of paper and let them hand them out like you're in Vegas on the Strip all over Mackinac.
It was quite surreal. He looked like the Pied Piper of Hamelin walking up the hill with all the blue shirts behind him, chanting, "Clean it up." Let's talk about the things that maybe weren't discussed here that perhaps should have been.
Well, we've discussed term limits, but I think the legislature should also consider marriage limits, don't you think?
Explain.
Well, if you can, you can limit your term, couldn't we start doing limits?
Is this a proposal?
No, darling, it's not. No, it's just, the other things should be limited.
There were lots of
besides
proposals going around
Yeah.
downtown over the last couple of weeks. You mentioned Confefe.
Yes.
And that was being talked about quite a lot, bandied
Yes, it
around
was.
Wednesday evening.
Yeah.
And it stretched into last night in the tent. There were all sorts of words being made up last night down there at the Bourbon evening. A very good evening, but I understand that's off the record, so
Yes,
we can't
yes.
actually, I'm seeing Sandy glaring at me over there. That was definitely off the record.
One thing that's really missing from the conference now that those of us who've been coming for a long time got used to, which was big sports at night. It was time to turn on the TVs in this room in the parlor.
playoffs.
And put on Pistons playoffs and Red Wings playoffs, and we don't have that anymore. So Arn Tellem was here. I think a lot of people were telling him, I wish you weren't here. I wish the Pistons were in the finals like they were during this conference once upon a time. And you know, a lot of us have memories of watching Red Wings playoff games here, and that's not happening this year. And it's kind of a void. The Tigers, by the way, always play poorly during this conference, even in championship years, which is something I think we should all just expect from now on.
Absolutely. Going back to one thing that someone brought up to me on several occasions was the lack of probably plays into the marijuana legislation, late night snacking along Main Street. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, you're trying to get to bed, and it's like, I want a Bucharest wrap, I want a sandwich, I want a shawarma. Maybe we need to talk to them and get a little pop-up shawarma tent here next year.
It's definitely under the category of first world problems. But I did hear a lot of people say, from downtown saying that, why do all the kitchens at the restaurant close at 10? Don't they know there's 1,600 people on this island who want something to eat late at night?
But I think the Grand Hotel could solve this. Instead of putting that little mint on our pillow, they could put a pecan fudge ball.
Well, there you go.
Which I think would be, you know, very satisfying.
Who would complain about that?
Nobody.
Salty snack. What about the fact that going to the Detroit mayoral race, Coleman Young not being here? This was one of the things that wasn't really being discussed downtown, the race, and it's only five months away. Should this have been higher up on the talking list for us?
Well, I think maybe we need more candidates in the mayoral race. I think it might be interesting. Perhaps the Kirtland Warbler or Guccifer should join in.
Was him not being here, Matt, playing to his base? But are they going to say, well, he doesn't need to be up there?
Yeah, I don't understand what the political strategy or rationalization may or may not be. But you're right, until this morning, there had not been much talk about the fact that there's a mayoral election in the city of Detroit, the largest city in the state, coming up in just a few months. And I think that what Mayor Duggan presented earlier in the week was very well received and very well presented, but not told in the context of a re-election campaign. And maybe that works in his favor, but there was a lack of buzz on the topic. I didn't hear anybody saying, what do you think is going to happen in November? And maybe that's reminiscent of the presidential campaign last year, which also didn't get a lot of buzz here on Mackinac, except on Friday morning.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the fact that some people might be taking the attitude of, well, it's a foregone conclusion?
Mm-hmm. I think that's
possibly.
As a dame for Duggan, I think that's probably pretty true.
And that's proved problematic recently, the foregone conclusions.
Oh, yes, it has. I don't think it'll, I don't think there'll be an echo.
We'll see,
Yeah.
we'll see. So what are our talking points? What do we need to get done? What do we want to see next year? What are people going to be talking about next year downtown after hours, do you suppose?
A lot of politics next year. I mean, this was a warm-up for everybody. If you plan on coming to the conference next year, get in tune with elections. And I think if you're talking about downtown after hours at the conference, you're going to see a lot of campaign workers, a lot of entourages happening late night, because that's what next year is going to be all about. Between midterm congressional elections, what's going on in the state legislature, the governor, everything ahead, that will be the Mackinac mode for 2018.
Marcy?
I agree. I think there will be a lot of debates. I think there'll be a lot of excitement. I think there'll be a lot of parties, which we could look forward to.
Absolutely.
Yes.
A few more confessions.
Fundraisers, which our wallets could look forward to.
Excellent. And so finally, for next year, we've got, I think, one project to, Mogo bikes. Let's talk about them for a second. Love those. When they came out, I was speaking to Lisa up here, we need to get a couple of racks up here.
Who would have thought that Detroit would have bike sharing before Mackinac Island?
Right, yeah. the bicycling lobby are yelling at me saying, no, we're not going to have Mogo bikes up here, absolutely not. I said that they'll be free, absolutely not. But the problem, of course, with that would be that the racks up here would be empty and all the bikes would be down the hill. So we have to get a horse and trailer to bring them back up so we can just whiz down the hill. Well, it's been fantastic having you guys up here with me. I've enjoyed this very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know we're doing the to-do list next.
Oh, yeah, Chris is going to have that, isn't she?
Yeah.
So the to-do list. So we'll have to put the pop-up Bucharest on the agenda.
Pop-up Bucharest bikes. We talk about buzz on the island. One of the great things I get to do here is I MC a session every year called Mackinac 101, where we teach new attendees how to get the most out of the conference. And we talk about how approachable everybody is and how friendly and open everybody is here at the conference, which is one of the great attributes. So I think for a to-do list coming up for next year for everybody who attended, we talked a lot about restoring civility in politics. How about restoring civility in business? And the same civility that we show each other here at Mackinac, the same approachability and openness to conversation we show to each other as a business community in Michigan all year long. That would be refreshing.
For God's sake, that's a stupid idea.
Don't answer my emails.
Okay.
No,
I think we should have more lack of civility.
You're going rogue, Marcy, as per usual.
Sorry. One thing I would like to say that has nothing to do with your question, but I want to acknowledge Dennis in this. I've been coming to this conference for 32 years, I think. And I don't recognize anybody from those years. Of course, I don't recognize anybody from last year either. But I think this year had the most women presenters of any year since I've been here. And I honor you for that. Yes, that's great. All of you, Tammy and Sandy. I think that was a wonderful change. And I hope to see it repeated.
Yes, a round of applause for Dennis and Sandy over there. Thank you very much. So I think that wraps this up for the
Are we done?
Uncensored. I've got to run down and shoot Flashpoint with Devon now. We've got people standing by waiting for ferries to get off the island.
What station is that on?
WDIV Local 4, Sunday at 10 a.m. We'll see you then. Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thank you very
Thank
much. Marcy, you were very kind.
I was very kind.
You were very kind. Yeah. Well, Morning View, Mackinac Uncensored. I really enjoyed this, Dennis. How about you? I thought this was a great start. I guess we got to now take a look at, do we continue this going on into the future? And I think based on all the conversations and the reaction to some of the responses, I think we have something to build on. What do you think?
I look forward to it.
Yeah.
This was great. I think a lot of people stuck around to hear what people had to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bravo.
So this is the 2017 Mackinac Policy Conference. We're here on Mackinac Island at the beautiful Grand Hotel. We work really hard to make sure that all of you have a great experience here on the island, but I think one of the things we have to do before we go, we have to give a very big thank you to the staff and team of Grand Hotel.
Oh, they did an outstanding job.
They take very good care of us.
And to your team. Our team at the
Thank you.
Chamber that did just a stellar job this year at the conference.
We do. We have an amazing team, and we have a great leader. Thank you for your chairmanship this year, Dennis.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, very happy.
I look forward to being a civilian next year, though.
All right, so we're going to wrap it up here. Again, Morning View, Mackinac Uncensored. We're going to look forward to feedback about this morning and how we build upon it.
I think we're going to toss over to Christy now.
Yeah.